this thing a little bit. Okay, settle down. Want to see this? Not even full. Welcome to spring training. Thanks for being here at this mandatory session. It's going to be an hour and a half of CLE and ethics, which is good because it's not even a Friday afternoon. From Rob Keppel. Before that, you're going to hear from Mike Anderson and longtime legendary District Attorney Johnny Holmes. Most of the classes are going to be smaller, mandatory only for a small group of people, and most of them are going to be on the sixth floor in the sixth floor conference room. So if you should get an email whether it's mandatory for you or not. Also, on Outlook, there's going to be a thing that says CLE of the month. You can click on there to see what the schedule is for the month. And we have a training committee: Justin Wood, Colleen Guido, Tanisha Manning, who's on the felony training committee. If you have any questions, you can talk to them or just shoot me an email. Also, John Jordan, he's one of our last entrants into the training committee. On the misdemeanor side, we have Matt Pennegy, Matt Pennegy, Sonny Mitchell, and Jessica Aiken are the felony, and the others are the misdemeanor training committee. So we really need to have a good, robust training. Like I said, almost every Tuesday between 2 and 4, and it should be CLE on all of them. Anyway, I want to introduce Mike Anderson. He was a district attorney for 17 years. In that 17 years, he tried 11 death penalty cases, assuming he got death. Okay, so he was involved in 11 death penalty cases. But he had 11 straight life sentences when he was in major offenders. 11 straight life sentences. And that's pretty big considering a lot of those cases he tried with a guy named Casey O'Brien, which made it almost impossible. Anyway, he was elected to the district court. He was on the bench for 12 years. He was the administrative judge. And without further ado, Mike.
First of all, let me just thank Steve for just a tremendous job. He's been doing this for about 30 days, and he has basically left no stone unturned. I've had people come to me that say, I haven't seen Don Lozano in years, and he's been hitting them up. He's been hitting them up to find out what we need, what works, what needs to be addressed in misdemeanor court for number threes. You that are here from misdemeanor, what you have to say is just as important as what the chiefs had to say. So Steve is going everywhere so that we can make sure that the information that we present to you is meaningful. And we don't just have you sitting here looking at your watch and clocking some CLE. So really and truly, tremendous job. He's really taken this on and done a great job. I mean, he got Mr. Holmes here just so because he thought it was a good thing to do, and it would be great to have someone of his stature address us. So, oh, okay, all right. We're here to talk about ethics today, and I think during the next couple of years, certainly during this legislative session, prosecutors are going to be maligned from certain corners of our existence, most especially the Innocence Project, who did a survey based on certain numbers and came out, I guess, with the conclusion that we were the next lowest thing to PONSCO. Now, then TDCAA, and again, it's great to see TDCAA back in this building. They will always be welcome here. I don't know what happened there, but it ain't happening again. So, but then TDCAA took this study, they broke it down, they crunched the numbers again, and they found out that many of these numbers were faulty. Many of the things that this organization said and reported as fact just were not so. And so a great deal of respect and thanks should go to TDCAA for having our backs. They spent a lot of time and a lot of effort to basically take this so-called factual report from the Innocence Project, bring it out into the broad daylight and expose it for what it was. So this is going to be a big issue. Ethics will be a huge issue in the next couple of years, and we cannot be on the defensive. We're going to get out ahead of this, and we're going to show people that, you know, we are the good guys. We are the people that you want sitting next to you if somebody hurts you. And we do it ethically, but we will kick your butt if it needs to be kicked. And that is the way it needs to be done. I was lucky enough to be hired by Mr. Holmes right out of law school. It was, I guess, honestly, before they got to know me very well. And so I was fortunate enough to come to work here. Best thing that ever happened to me. I remember Ted Bush calling me right before Thanksgiving break and saying, "Hey, Mike, we would like to offer you a job as an assistant district attorney." I just lit up, and he said, "And if you'd like to have some time to think about that, you can call me back." And I just sat there dumbfounded, and I said, "Well, Mr. Bush, I'll hang up and call you back. I'll hang up and call you back in 2 weeks. I'll call you back in a week, whatever you want me to do. But if you'll have me, I'll come down there and work right now, because that's where I want to be." And that didn't even begin to express how great the time at that office was. And it was an ethical office, an office where you just did the right thing, and it was exemplified by the leadership. And I'll just give you a quick story to show you. You know, people can talk about things, and people can say, "This is the way you should do things." But when you see those people do those things themselves, it really brings it home. And so I was a brand new chief, and I had a case that involved the New York Mets. And I hated the Mets before, I hated them then, I still hate the Mets. I taught my children to hate the Mets. But this was a case where they were alleged to have committed aggravated assault on peace officers. And I spent, I can't tell you how many hours fleshing this out, and come to find out that a kick in the groin of a police officer turned out to be when the defendant was leaning over a planter box, their foot slipped and the back of their leg hit the officer in the groin. That's not exactly like a drop kick with a running start. So the more I found out about this, the more I realized, man, this just isn't a felony. It's just not. And so I thought, who can I talk to that I know will give me a square answer, and just see if I'm just harebrained in my opinion of this. And it was suggested to me that I talk to Mr. Holmes. I said, it's Sunday. And I had just gotten a phone call from the police officers, incidentally, where one of them said, "You know, Mike, we need to talk about something. What can we possibly talk about we have not talked about for the last 3 months?" Well, we were drinking that night. No, I'm sorry. We might have been drinking that night. I might need to change my clothes after you told me that. So, the bottom line is, I called up Johnny Holmes. He was at home as a Sunday night, and he certainly had the right to be away from us for a little while. And he said, "Come over here." I went over to his house, and I remember sitting in his living room, and he had an oil can. He was kind of spinning his hand. I told him what the deal was, and I told him what my concerns were. And then I had some real problems with pursuing this based on what it was. He said, "Mike, I will never make you try a case that you do not believe in." And, you know, it's one thing to hear somebody talk about ethics. It's another thing to see somebody who is the top law enforcement official in Harris County live by that code. So I'm going to sit down. I'm going to bring the guy who really set the tone for this office to be the best office in the United States, and is an example that we will follow in trying to get back to that level. John Holmes, Jr.
What says the state? Well, I haven't heard that in over a decade. I'm going to be short and brief. But one of the things, when you talk about ethics, that I think best exemplifies something that occurred during my watch. And when I've been asked by people in the various public presentations I was called upon to make from time to time, what is the difference between a prosecutor and a defense attorney? And resisting the urge to be not so polite, I really tried to explain what the difference was. And you quote Chapter 2 of the Code of Criminal Procedure in an effort to see that justice is done, et cetera, et cetera. But in 1976, I had an occasion to try a case that really brought that home and gave me an example that people could really understand when you explain or try to explain the difference between prosecution and defense. And it was a case involving the second half of the Garth Bates matter, wherein Judge Bates was accused of bribery. Mr. Vance was the lead prosecutor in that case. I sat second, and Henry Hawkins sat third. It was an interesting case, and after it was completed and disposed of, came on to be heard the guy that carried the money, the $60,000 from, or actually it's 59, from the safety deposit box to Judge Bates, a guy by the name of Ed Rickland. And apparently it was Mr. Rickland's position that the delivery of this, what turned out to be $59,000, was really a gambling debt that he owed to the judge. It was well known they were both big gamblers, and that he had no idea this had anything to do with bribery. After the state put on its evidence and rested, judge, who was a visiting judge, asked Mike Ramsey, who was counsel for the defendant, Rickland, if he desired to make an opening statement now that the state had rested. And of course Mike did. The judge turned to the jury panel and again admonished them about what an opening statement was and wasn't evidence, et cetera, et cetera. And while he had the jury's attention talking to him about that, Mike leaned over to Henry and I and said, "Don't you guys dare laugh when I put this bullshit on the jury." I admire Mike. I like him. I think he's a good lawyer. We got along great when I was doing this stuff. And that's not anything degrading his reputation, because he was doing precisely what his role was as a defense attorney. He was to take the position of his client and urge it to his client's best interest during the course of that trial. And that's something he should be doing. And he's not required to believe it. But I found that kind of sad at the time, but I was glad all this happened because it gave me the opportunity to better explain the difference. We as prosecutors got to believe what we're doing is the right thing to do. We're vouching for the credibility of these witnesses. We're saying proceeding in the manner and the way that we are is the proper course of action. And we are required to believe it. And that's a big, big difference. One other point I want to make, I'm going to sit down. You'll find that there are going to be some rules during the course of Mike Ennis' term of office. In my 22 years as district attorney, the operations manual was rather large and thick, and it was there for a reason. And the reason is you don't have 250 or 60 different ways of representing the state of Texas and Harris County, Texas. The office of district attorney is an elected position. The public votes for the person to serve in that capacity with the ideas, concepts, and directions that that person has. And it is unreasonable to think as an assistant DA that you're free to make any kind of decisions you want in administration of justice. You're not. There are going to be rules. Because the public is looking to the head guy to set those standards and rules. If the public doesn't like it, they can do something about it. And I said many, many times in the 5 years I faced the public ballot, 5 terms, if this is not an operation where you dial an 800 number and push 1 if you agree with those homes and push 2 if you don't. We do it my way, and when you don't like that, you put somebody else here. And so the elected official has got to set the tone and set the rules and the standards so that you don't have 40 or 250 or how many lawyers there are now going 900 different directions in the administration of justice. Don't resent that. That's proper, and it's in the best interest of the office and later on in your reputation as a member of this office. I'm really, really flattered to be asked to say the damn thing at all. I sure appreciate seeing Ron Keppel. Robin was assistant DA here and has saved our ass many a time. Much more than he ever did as an assistant. In the capacity that he's serving in now. Y'all have fun. I'll be 72 on my next birthday. There's not a damn thing I'd have done differently. It's a great job. Enjoy it. Thank you. Back when I was appointed by Governor Clemens to fill the unexpired term of Carol Vance, staff members got together and bought me a cap. And that's the cap that says D.A. Houston. And I would ask that you please not ask me why it wasn't presented to Mr. Rosenthal or the late district attorney. Instead, it's being presented to Mike Anderson in the hopes that he will wear it for a long time.
Well, that's going to be a tough act to follow. Next you're going to hear from Rob Keppel. Rob is the Executive Director of the TDCAA. And for those of you who don't know what they do, you will shortly in your career. I was in the Department of Justice briefly, and I worked around other people from other jurisdictions. And I remember them talking about how bad it was for them as prosecutors in their state. And I thought it was because they didn't have an organization like TDCAA. I mean, it really, really makes a difference. Rob worked for this office after coming from Fulbright and Jaworski, where you won that one case you mentioned today?
One case in 3 years.
One case in 3 years. After coming from Fulbright, he was a deputy dog in a misdemeanor section, and then he was went on to being a felony chief for several years. Okay. He has some other accomplishments, but I'll let him tell you about those. Okay, Rob Keppel.
Yeah, I don't know about accomplishments when you talk about 11 straight cases and all that. I was one of those people that, you know, I don't have to worry about those. You know, I won 100 straight cases. No, I got that over with early and often, losing, so I didn't ever have to worry about that. My discussion, my talk with you today is going to be about our profession, where we're at. There's some real challenges that we're facing. I've had the fortune of starting as a prosecutor in Harris County, and I believe learning how to do it right. I left in 1990 to go to the association and continue to serve prosecutors now as the executive director of our association. It is a tremendous profession of very, very honorable people, which I care about very deeply. But we've got some challenges. There's some real bad things going on out there. There's some bad things being said about you guys that we need to talk about today. We need to talk about how we're going to respond to that as a profession. I'm going to start with this video clip. Are we ready with the sound? This is a defense attorney in Austin, Texas. Let's go back. It's too good a clip. Yeah. No, I cannot do what this guy does. No, you're not going to get him.
One more time, then we'll just proceed.
All right, you guys just watch this for a second, all right? This is Adam Raposa. Adam Raposa is a very colorful lawyer in Austin who once spent about 90 days in jail for making a masturbatory gesture in front of a judge after the judge denied one of his motions. Right now he's talking about how important it is to be a lawyer. This is his television advertisement, because he represents his client, and if you're standing in the way of his client, if you're a prosecutor, you're in his way. And he cannot stand it if you're in his way, and that's his advertisement. Nice, huh? And you wonder why we are in trouble as a profession as prosecutors. It makes absolutely no sense, but that's the guy. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about this report today. This is the report that we issued as an association about prosecution. You know, we don't, as an association, speak for prosecutors. You speak for yourselves. But we try to help give you the ammunition and the information to do that. And in a very rare event, we put together a report talking about prosecutorial misconduct, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today and where we're going as a profession. Let's start, though, when we talk about what it means to be a prosecutor, let's start with, here we go. Let's start with some sports analogies, because, you know, we all grew up playing sports. I don't know whether we're going to get to see or hear this audio, but I can play the video. We're not going to get audio on it, but I don't care. Who here watches the Tour de France? Yeah, after Lance Armstrong, no one really watches it. But, okay, this was a couple years ago. That's a guy by the name of Andy Schleck. He's leading in the Pyrenees. He's almost going to win it. This is the last stage. He's climbing. Things are going great, but something goes terribly wrong. All of a sudden, the chain slips on his bike. His chain is broken, and the guy right behind him, Vinokurov, and another fellow, Alberto Contador, who won the race because Andy Schleck's chain slipped, takes off and leaves him behind. And by the narrowest of margins, because of that damage to the yellow jersey, the guy who has the yellow as always is the leader, because of the damage, he didn't get to win. Now, bike aficionados, what was wrong with what happened there? The announcer said, well, this is when fair play gets thrown out the window, fans. Why? What was wrong with that? Who knows? Unwritten rule. In the Tour de France, in bike riding, when the yellow jersey is in trouble because of mechanical or other difficulty, you never take advantage of that. If the yellow jersey has a flat tire or a busted chain, you stop, everybody stops, lets them fix that so that the race can be a fair race based upon who's the best rider. Not this time. This time, Alberto Contador was right there. Yellow jersey had trouble. He couldn't resist. He took off. The announcers lamented, well, fair play is out the window. So, you know, we kind of learned that. But, you know, we shouldn't really worry that that's just the only sport. Many of y'all are baseball fans. You grew up honoring people like Babe Ruth. I'm not going to use the word cheater, but Babe was legendary, the things he did. He had a number of different tricks. One of them was, it was in a book I read about Babe Ruth. In a very dark evening when they're about to call the game, he runs back for a fly ball. He's going back, grabs the ball, runs on in. They call the game because of darkness. Only one problem. He didn't have the ball in his hand. It had gone over his head. He just pretended that he caught the ball, and nobody asked. But, you know, that was our legend in baseball, and we learned in baseball that that's kind of the way you play it. Now, this one, let's go back. Anyone remember this? This is Derek Jeter. A couple of years ago. If you look real closely, it looks like he gets hit by the ball, doesn't it? But look again. Where does the ball hit? It hits his back. All right? Doesn't hit him. Now, when he runs to first base, he does this. He's running to first base like this, and he's holding it, and the trainers are coming out, and he's looking at the trainer, and the camera catches. He's got a big smile on his face. He gets to first base by faking to be hit. And you saw this year in baseball a couple more times. There were at least 2 occasions where baseball players clearly did not catch the ball. There was one where the guy did the Babe Ruth trick, and the ref or the umpire didn't look in his glove to see, and the ball was out in the outfield. And another one where the guy dove into the stands, the ball's rolling around, the cameras catch it, grabs the ball from under here, and then holds it up, and they call him out. It's what we expect. It's kind of what we expect. It's what we raise our kids to do. Finally, and this is one you're going to really enjoy. That's soccer. No one cares about that one. Football, all right? Football, the legendary "this is the wrong ball" play. How many people have seen this videotape? He goes under center. Everyone set. Oh, coach, it's the wrong ball. I'm holding the wrong ball here. Gee, coach, what am I going to do? Oh, he's going to run. Now, what you don't get in the audio, since there's no audio here, is the parents are cheering wildly. This is like the best play ever. The coach ran this play, set up a trick play, so the other kids are going, what the heck? You know, fair play. It's a little different, isn't it? We kind of teach ourselves in sports that kind of stuff is really okay. Well, and I learned a little different. I learned a little different when I came here to the Harris County District Attorney's Office. You all know who this guy is. I'm glad he was here today. I wish he was here so I could tell stories about him to his face, but I'm going to get most of this right. Some people say he's kind of gruff, a little bit outspoken. I've heard rumors that he once prosecuted his own mother. That's a rumor. It's a legend. It is a legend, though. He prosecuted some FBI informants or somebody once. I mean, the guy was unscrupulously honest. It's my understanding when you called him, Mike, you probably got his phone number out of the phone book because he was actually in the white pages, his home number. You could call him. He'd talk to anybody when you called. But I can recall, I think maybe for me, the defining story about this fella is a case by the name of Pedro Oregon, which is a case he had towards the end of his career. In fact, I talked to Ed Porter, who's in the back. He's retired now, but he was the one who actually handled it, and I talked to him about the case a little bit. And as I recall, I'm going to get the spirit right. I'm not going to get everything, all the facts right. It's kind of a cop gone bad deal. You've got a group of gang officers who pulls a guy over in the middle of the night on the side of the highway. They're looking for dope. There's no dope. There's just all sorts of paraphernalia. They decide they're going to use that guy right there on the spot, flip him into a CI, and they're going to do a knock and talk on the dealer's house. Now, is that really a good idea, using a guy who's drunk on the side of the road? They pulled him over for DWI. Is it really a good idea to use that guy and run straight over to somebody's house, especially since you're the gang unit and you haven't checked in with narcotics? Probably not a good idea, but they decide they're going to do it. So they get a little team together. They do a briefing. It's not a very good briefing. Not everybody really understands what's going to happen. But the drunk CI is going to walk up. He's going to knock on the door. They're going to get the door open. Then he's going to fall to the floor, just drop. And then the officers are going to do some talking. Now, some think they're supposed to go in. Some don't know. But the first guy in the line thinks he's going in. So they go to the door. They knock. Door opens. Rafael Oregon's there. The CI dutifully drops to the ground. First officer says, "That's my cue. I'm going in." So he goes in. Well, what do the other officers do now at the front of the train's going in? Yeah, you can imagine. They're all kind of heading on in the door. Rafael Oregon, he drops to the ground as well. They see a guy peering out of the door in the back of the apartment who slams the door. They head on back down to the back of the darkened hallway. They kick the door, and the first officer at the door screams, "Gun!" Right after he screams gun, bam, there's a shot. Well, what do the officers do when they're being shot at? They shoot back, right? I think about 36 times, actually. And Mr. Oregon, Pedro Oregon, who was in the back, he did have a gun, by the way, did not shoot it, was shot about 12 times in the back. All right? Didn't shoot. What the officers didn't know at the time is, yeah, maybe it was a drug house, but as it turns out, they had been robbed just days before. So in the middle of the night to go into the drug house, it might have been totally reasonable. Mr. Oregon thought they were being robbed again. So that case is now going to the grand jury, and it's being watched closely by this community. It's a huge case, as you might imagine. Here's a guy who really didn't do anything wrong, got shot in the back 12 times by police officers who never should have been there in the first place. Now, that's a challenge for a district attorney, and that case was going to grand jury. That's the kind of challenge that you have here in Houston on a regular basis. All right. Well, we'll get back to that story in a minute. I prosecuted here in the 80s, and many of you all did too, and you knew it was bad. Judge Poe gave a talk, and he used to use this phrase for how bad it was in Houston. He used to talk about how every time you go to the 7-Eleven, you'd say, "Cover me, honey, I'm going in for the milk." And, you know, from what I can tell, from back then, it was really bad. I mean, it was really bad. There was a lot of crime in this city. We were being eaten up in the early 80s. Crime was the #1 issue in the country, in the state, in this county, I mean, upwards of 1,000 people were being killed. 2 store clerks, it seemed every weekend, were being shot in robberies. And the public really was looking for a superhero. They were really looking for somebody who could defend them against what was going on the streets of Houston. And I got to tell you, it was you. It was you. It was the prosecutors. It was the district attorney's office. At that time, I believe the public was really looking for us to take care and to protect them, and it was a heck of a job. And look at the crime rates. I mean, heck, in the 1960s, it was nothing compared to 1985 and 1990. The crime index had just absolutely skyrocketed, and for y'all who were prosecuting back then, you knew that. I mean, it really felt like a battle zone. And who was there? Mr. District Attorney. We don't got the sound. I might play it for you later, but there was an old radio show called Mr. District Attorney, Champion of the People. And it was a 1939 radio show, and it really was kind of what we were all doing in 1980. In fact, I've seen a bunch of these comic books out before that period of time. There's actually one where they're fighting gambling, and there's one where they're fighting gangs. It's all the same stuff. There's one where they're fighting graffiti. The DA actually has a whole comic book about fighting graffiti, but the DA was the guy. What was the turning point in Texas? I think it was this guy right here. Y'all know who that is? Kenneth McDuff. McDuff had been on a death row for a number of murders. Really bad guy. Really, really bad guy. But had been paroled after the United States Supreme Court had basically held our death penalty scheme unconstitutional. A bunch of people got basically commuted to life. And back then, life in prison meant you were eligible for parole after 15 years. And because we only had about 36,000 prison beds in the early 80s, and the Republican governor vetoed the building of 3 more units during that period of time, he got out. He got paroled. And the body count went up to about 8 more people that were killed in the following 4 or 5 years after he got out. They finally captured him after he kidnapped and raped and killed a girl from a car wash about 3 blocks from my house in Austin. And he was finally executed. Didn't take long after we got him. He tried to kind of parlay his way out of execution by promising to take everybody to where the other bodies were buried. And I think the state kind of said, nah, we're kind of good with that. We'll take care of you this time around. So he was executed. But really, this guy became the poster child. And when this article was published in the Texas Monthly, the legislature was really going to have to do something. And I think they did. Knox Fitzpatrick. Knox was a very, very good prosecutor in Dallas County. He left to go work for the governor. After he worked for Governor Clements in the early 90s, he basically went back to the DA's office and was lobbying for prosecutors and for changes in the criminal justice system. And everyone was talking about what we're going to do, whether we're going to have guidelines, what's going to happen. And Knox had 3 words to solve the problem. And he would walk around the Capitol saying these words: build, build, build. And that was his solution, because we only had 36,000 prison beds at the time. And you know what? The state did that. Well, there was lots of diversions and all that, but the bottom line was, when it came to violent offenders, the state built prison capacity. And it wasn't just Texas, by the way, it was national. And if you look at this deal, you can see that really, I mean, it kind of made sense. They built a lot of prison capacity for violent offenders, and they really were able to boost that capacity. And that, I'm going to submit to you, has made a tremendous difference. As a prosecutor, I think it made a difference to y'all, because when you went in and you made an offer on a case, like 15 to do, and you knew the guy was going to do half of that time instead of a 10th, for a 3G, it kind of made sense. You kind of felt like you actually were able to do something now to protect the public. You had some tools that you didn't have before. And that, I think, for y'all made a huge difference. It made what you were doing more relevant to protecting the public. And, by the way, it made a huge difference. Over time, crime has fallen. In Texas, crime has fallen at a historic 48% in the last 15 years. It's tremendous. Now, listen, I'm not saying it's all because we just built prison beds. You're going to hear that there's lots of different reasons for that, lots of different people taking credit for it. everybody, even the people who hate prisons and hate what you do for a living, will say, though, that the prison capacity has made a significant difference and has contributed to this deal. So it may be a matter of degree, but the message is what you've been able to accomplish as prosecutors protecting the public with the resources that you've been given really has made a difference, and it's really worked. Now, when I was talking about this originally, I was talking with Steve about, he goes, I don't feel that way in Houston. You're talking about how all crime went down, but somehow it still feels pretty bad in Houston. So I went and looked at the number, and I got to tell you, Houston's the orange ones. Sorry about that. The big, long, tall orange ones are Houston. Houston, your numbers really aren't near as good as the rest of the state. But in all fairness, Dallas is worse. Fort Worth is still pretty bad. The larger urban areas are still bad. But the message I want to send to you is, yeah, you may still have a challenge on a day-to-day basis with violent crime and crime in Houston, but the rest of Texas thinks that crime has been solved. In Austin, at the Capitol, they think that crime has been done. They finished that. We're good with crime now. We're done. So there may be a little disconnect between what's going on in Houston and what our legislators in Austin think right now, and that's going to be a bit of a challenge. That, I believe, will be a real challenge for us. So I guess when we talk about how prosecutors are faring in the public and why maybe we're under the gun a little bit, factor number one to me is y'all kind of did a good job. You all made good on what you do for a living. Crime is way down, and now frankly the public doesn't seem to care about it as much. And I think that has a little bit of impact on what's going on. In fact, we're down to about number 10 on what the public cares about, right after hunger, homelessness, and the size and power of the federal government. One cautionary tale about that, too. A lot of people who are at the Texas Capitol now who are elected are anti-government people. We need to take government by the neck and choke it. Well, you might think that a lot of good conservative folks are going to be great for prosecution, but who are you guys? You're government to them. You're government employees, okay? You get your money from the county and from the state. So to a lot of people at the Capitol, crime is way down. No one cares about crime. Now we want to make government smarter, and guess what? You're just right now, for them, we ain't the superheroes we were in the 80s. You're kind of like government right now. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge. The other thing, factor number 2, I think, is the economy's been real bad. So you've got ACLU folks and folks who believe that no one should be in the prisons. Generally, we really shouldn't be incarcerating as much. And you can take really staunch fiscal conservative people, and you take the left people that go around the bend, and you take the real conservative people that go around the bend, and they meet up. And suddenly you've got the ACLU and the Texas Association of Business and other super conservative people thinking, you know what? We don't need to build prisons. In fact, we need to find ways not to build them. And you get a new organization called Right on Crime, which is really just one person in a website, but it sounds like it's huge. And Right on Crime says that we've solved crime. You can't read it here very well, but he actually takes credit for it. It says the reforms, let's see, how's it go? Meaningful criminal justice reform we have seen in Texas, Oklahoma, Georgia, and now in Pennsylvania. Potential changes. In Texas, for example, we've seen crime rates drop to historic lows and over $2 billion saved. Wait a second, this guy's been doing this stuff for 2 years, where were you guys? So now they're taking credit saying all these diversions are saving us billions of dollars. We really don't need these tough on crime policies anymore. By the way, that's being echoed. This is the Legislative Budget Board. They are the people who write the budget for the state, and then they give it to the legislators. They're the bean counters. They're the accountants. They just issued a report with some selected issues and recommendations, and one of them is to establish a new punishment standards commission with the idea, and you might imagine, gee, is that to make sure that we're punishing people or protecting the public or public safety? What's the real intent of a punishment standards commission? Well, I think you can find it right here. We want to reduce state costs. It's not about protecting the public. There is a public safety. We all want it to be safe, but we're convinced that we can save money. So when you read about something called the Punishment Standards Commission, understand it is about saving money. It's about reducing the length of sentences. It's about getting as many people out of the prisons as we can. That's what it's about. In fact, I just had to put this. This is from their little brochure, which, I got to tell you, they're really trying to make their point. Like, oh my God, we have so many people in prison. Look, there's the population of the state as it grows a little bit in the bottom, and then they put that shrill and outlandish one as the prison population by percentage. I guess to try to illustrate that, oh my God, we've just gone crazy by having 150,000 beds in Texas. So that's the kind of thing we're going to see at the Capitol this time around. And of course, here's the numbers, and here's why they like the idea that we've got to divert people. $38,000 for a prison bed and $4,000 to put somebody on community supervision. They love those numbers at the Capitol. I would expect you're going to see, by the way, some pushes to do a lot more mandatory probation. Remember that in 1995 we had all the mandatory probation? That worked, didn't it? They're going to go back to that. I think there'll be pushes to do a lot more mandatory probation to save money. I think you probably know how well that worked out for all the people who didn't want probation. Like, please give me a misdemeanor or anything. I really don't want to be on paper. But I think we're going back that way. Oh, and I told you the other day about how big business went around. This is the Texas Association of Business, who for some reason just announced that they're on board with all these new proposals to start deferring people and to start getting people out of prison. I'm like, what? Really? Because last time I checked, they're barking at prosecutors about doing more hot check work, and we got the theft of all the copper and all this business stuff. They were looking to you guys to prosecute. This is their lobbyist who did that. The next day, the Texas Association of Business Lobbyists announced that their organization was supporting a $4 billion tax cut for Texans. So, read between the lines. If we're going to get a $4 billion tax cut, we have to find somewhere to take the money from. So we're going to be good government people, and we're going to say reduce the prison population. That's where the money is going to come from. So read between the lines. That's what that is. So we got the economy issue that's, I think, pushing on y'all and making it difficult for y'all to do your job. What else? Well, this is huge. This has been a phenomenon that's been around now for about 10 years. But the exoneration phenomenon has come on and has come on strong. And that has really captured the public's attention, and rightfully so. It's an amazing deal with the way DNA has been used. We're talking about video statements. We're talking about misidentification, which has been huge. Everywhere you go, this phenomenon has really impacted and undercut the public's faith in what we do. Anyone know what that is? Anyone recognize that house? How about this? Yeah, that's the Duke Lacrosse house. Another factor, I think, frankly, is that good government is really just boring, isn't it? When you do your job well, no one likes to talk about it, but the media will go any way for a good story. And this was a great story. It started out with the district attorney by the name of Mike Nifong saying, I'm going to prosecute to the full extent of the law these really bad, horrible lacrosse guys, and they're terrible, and the media was eating it up, and everyone loved it, and the DA was doing press conferences and all sorts of stuff. And then this fellow, one of the lacrosse guys, says, well, I really wasn't there for this alleged sexual assault. In fact, allow me to give my alibi to the New York Times and to Newsweek. And you know, as a prosecutor, I am thinking you're in trouble when the defense is so proud of their alibi that they're publishing it in the New York Times. You have to know that there was a big problem when you see this in Newsweek, and here's the exact, and the receipts and all this stuff. You know we're in trouble. And indeed, the case fell apart. The DA had really extended himself way too far on this deal. And in fact, later on down the line, significantly delayed the release of DNA information, which would have exonerated a number of these guys, and he got tagged hard for it. And I don't know about y'all, but how often have y'all heard about Nifong? I mean, for 3 straight legislative sessions, people in the Texas Capitol were talking about Mike Nifong. Like, the guy's from North Carolina, for Christ's sake. But we were taking a beating for that because good government's boring. That was kind of interesting. Well, in all fairness, we have our own guy. Anyone know who that is? What is his name? That's Charles Sebesta, the former district attorney out of Burleson County. His nickname was Napalm Charlie. That ought to tell you something right there. He was the district attorney for about 30 years in his neck of the woods. It got to the point where no one really challenged him. I mean, no one ran at him. In fact, he was the guy who would tell the judge who to appoint on different criminal cases. He kind of ran that place. And he ended up prosecuting this guy, Anthony Graves, for a capital murder case, along with another fellow who's been executed for it. But the case fell apart. It fell apart with allegations that there was Brady information that Charles didn't turn over. It got reversed. The Fifth Court excoriated Charles in that particular case. And finally, some special prosecutors were brought in to try to retry it. Charlie Seeger was one of them. And instead of retrying the case, she ends up saying, look, this is one of the dirtiest prosecutors I've ever seen in my life. So this has not gone well for us. We're going to hear about this guy a lot. This guy is what people are holding up to you when they say, what are you going to do about him? What are you going to do about this dirty prosecutor? So unfortunately for us as a profession, we got to deal with this, and we got to talk about this. Oh, another factor, by the way, is resources for y'all. They're going away. The federal government used to support a lot of things that prosecutors do. Doesn't really happen now. In fact, I saw this. To address the changing role of the public defender, BJA has awarded a grant to the Bronx Defenders to create the Center for Holistic Defense. What the hell is that? I don't know. They're going to do something cool at the defense office for holistic defense practices. So I don't really know. But let's just say they're not giving it to you for kicking butt in trial right now. It's going to the Center for Holistic Defense. I can't wait to find out what that is. All right, the sixth and final factor. What has been, as a profession, and many of y'all are pretty new and don't know these people, what's been our response to the exoneration, to all these other problems, to new DNA that gives us a chance to test things? I got to tell you, our response as a profession has not always been that great. Okay, we've had a couple of bad incidents come up recently that we got some explaining to do. That's Lynn Switzer. Lynn Switzer was the district attorney up in Pampa. Tough, cowgirl all the way. In her mind, a deal's a deal. And she had a fellow by the name of Hank Skinner, who 15, 20 years ago, when he was tried in a really bad capital case, his attorney said, stop testing the DNA. It's hurting us. I don't want any more of this stuff tested. So we stopped testing it. Well, now, come the final appeals, who wants all the testing done, right? The defense. Well, in Lynn's mind, a deal's a deal. You didn't want to test it back then. You can't change the deal now. So she stuck to, deal's a deal. We are not going to test anymore. She went all the way to the Supreme Court on that on her own dime because the AG wouldn't represent her in a 1983 suit to fight testing on that case. She fought it for 3 years. You've maybe read about it in the paper. People are thinking, why don't you just test it? More than one district attorney called her and said, Lynn, you understand that if you test that stuff like today, you can get this guy executed within 3 or 4 months. Let's get it done and you can get to the final result a little quicker. She said, nope, deal's a deal. I'm going to stand on principle. Well, she finally wore out. She ran out of money. She quit the job as DA. She's no longer DA there. We got a new DA. And the AG took over the case and said, oh, we're going to test everything. So, the AG tested everything. What do you think the result was? It's more Hank Skinner than it's ever been before, okay? So I got to tell you, that kind of recalcitrance didn't help us. This fellow's Lee Haney, the former district attorney from Brownwood. Yeah, you won't know Lee either, because he's not the DA anymore. Back in the 90s, he had a fellow by the name of Ricky McGinn. Real bad guy, real bad murder. And once again, there was some stuff that hadn't been tested for DNA. A lot of it had, but there was a lot of blood. And Barry Scheck came in and said, look, he's only been on death row for 7 years. He's way below time. Let's take 6 months and let's test the rest of the stuff. And Lee Haney said, nope, I'm representing the victims in this deal. We had a good, solid case, and we're going to try to execute him. And Barry said, come on, dude, give us and test it. It's kind of final. And Lee said no. And they fought and fought and fought and fought. The governor finally stayed the deal, and they tested it, and it was more Ricky McGinn than ever before, and Ricky gets executed, and Lee promptly loses his job, gets unelected by the public that he thought he was representing, because they really didn't like the idea that he dug his heels in on, like, ABC and Good Morning America. This fellow, many of you know him. John Bradley, he was the former assistant DA here, a brilliant guy by all accounts, pretty hard-headed guy too. He was representing the state in a case by the name of Michael Morton, and you've all heard about that one because that's the one we're going to hear a lot about in February. There's a court of inquiry that's investigating the district attorney who tried Mr. Morton in the 80s. His name was Ken Anderson. Mr. Morton was accused of killing his wife in the early morning hours while she slept in bed and then going to work. Mr. Morton said, I didn't do it. I was at work. I didn't do it. Ken Anderson tried the case, got life in prison, and there was some evidence that was never tested. One of the pieces of evidence was a red bandana, which was found at a construction site 100 yards behind their house. There was some new construction going on back there, and the family had collected that. It had never been tested. Barry Scheck and his project wanted that tested. And John Bradley said, no. Legal and ethical said, no, you can't tie that to this crime scene. We're not going to test it. It's too far out. We're not testing this deal. And he fought that for 6 years. He fought that testing. He said, there's no way we're going to test it. Finally, a court ordered the testing, and the bandana was tested, and what happened? Yeah. The victim's blood, the woman's blood's on it, and not only that, there was DNA from a guy who was linked to 2 other murders in that area about the same time. In other words, it was a serial killer and a random killing. I talk about shocking the world. I mean, that stuff never happens, but Mr. Morton got lucky. And he got out based upon this bandana. Ken Anderson is going to, there's lots of allegations now that there was a lot of Brady information that was hidden in that case. There was, by the way, this office did not have an open file policy in the 80s. They had a closed file policy, and they fought rather than turn over anything or show anything to the defense. That's been changed, but that was the way that was tried back then. By the way, John Bradley, in probably Williamson County, arguably the most conservative jurisdiction in the state, he got beat. He got beat big time in the Republican primary. Now, here's this guy who's tough as nails, has helped crack this identity of Williamson County as a really tough place, and he gets beat like a drum in the Republican primary. Part of it probably was because a bunch of people were going around to his signs and tying red bandanas on them everywhere they saw him. And that's a picture of one of those red bandana deals. So John got beat. Not because he did anything illegal, not because he did anything unethical, but he got beat for the way he handled that DNA case and the way he handled his business there. So, I don't know. In the 80s, that was the monster. That's what we were fighting, It was a bad deal. And I'm wondering, I wake up today, and after all this, I wake up and I'm wondering why we're at this point, Why is it everyone's mad at us? All right, let's take about a 10-minute break, stretch, get something to drink, and we'll finish up. In a lot of different ways. And they managed to do a lot of different things. For instance, they created this group called Prosecutorial Oversight. It was a tour that was designed to go around the country and talk about prosecutor accountability in the wake of Thompson versus Connick, a case out of Louisiana where a wrongfully imprisoned fellow sued Louisiana and the DA for $14 million, and the Supreme Court said, no, prosecutor immunity lives. So we know that those folks are out there and they're going to be looking at prosecutor accountability. Why do you think prosecutor accountability and what prosecutors do is such a big issue now? Because look at the national statistics on exonerations. 35 of them have been by eyewitness. This is from their website. 17 for bad science, only 1 for a bad defense attorney. 3 for false confessions, 2 for bad informants, 7 for government misconduct, although only 2 of those the rest were cops. 2 of them were prosecutors. So why all of a sudden, after all these years, is the prosecutor misconduct such a big one? Why is that so important today? Anyone have an idea? I got a theory. I think it's because we're pretty much done with the DNA exonerations. I mean, we've been through that whole deal, right? We've tested just about everything we can. Now you got a whole big exoneration machine that doesn't have anyone to chew on anymore. So we turn our attention to some of the lesser numbers down there. So it only kind of makes sense that sooner or later they wanted to talk about prosecutor misconduct and what prosecutors have to do with exonerations. Your association decided to study this issue. We kind of put it together a group because we were hearing so much about Charles Sebesta and Mr. Morton and these deals that we thought a lot of people needed to know. And as a profession, we needed to take a look at ourselves and make sure that we were doing the work the way we thought we should be doing it, as best we could. Maybe it was going to end up in a written document. We didn't know that it would, but it might. Just a list of the people there. The action plan was to inform ourselves and read a bunch of stuff, which was going to be important. We were going to do a lot of interviews with people, actually talk to folks who handle these cases to see what we could learn about them. We were going to have 4 meetings, and we'd send it to the full board and we'd talk about it. And once again, we're going to have it ready for the session, which it is. We had a reading list. You know, there's a ton of stuff that people write about you and how you do your business. You probably don't have time to read it, but you ought to look sometime. We got a good reading list, like Reconceptualizing Prosecutorial Misconduct Through Moral Disengagement Theory. Yeah, that sounds like a reader, doesn't it? Yeah, this guy, a social cognitive approach. You probably don't understand many of the words there. I don't either, but you ought to read that. Improving prosecutorial decision-making through lessons of cognitive science. How about this one? Can an ethical person be an ethical prosecutor? By the way, that's Lawton Cummins. His answer to that is an emphatic no. Nobody can be an ethical prosecutor is the way he answers that. This is all in our report. You could actually go read that stuff. It's kind of interesting. There's a lot more. You could read the Masonheimer case itself. We teach that when we talk about Brady. It's kind of a litmus test for what can go wrong in a case if you've got a closed file policy for sure. A professor who I've met at the University of Texas wrote an article about prosecutor exceptionalism, remedial skepticism, and the legacy of Conant versus Thompson. I don't understand a word of that article, but it's something to do with being skeptical about remedies for prosecutors. And you can go to their website and look at those cases. Kind of interesting. We interviewed the judge in the Masonheimer case. We talked to, and this was important, a lot of people that were involved in Dallas when all these exonerations occurred, because we wanted to find out, because Dallas has had a huge history, what actually happened in Dallas. And we talked to the special prosecutors in the Graves case. We wanted to find out, really, inside baseball, what was going on there, what happened, because it's time for us to take a look, make sure we're doing our business right. First, one problem with that, though, we had to take a break when the Innocence Project on March 29th of last year dropped a report on us that said that there were 91 cases of prosecutorial misconduct in Texas between 2004 and 2008. 91 cases. Many of you were prosecuting that period of time. And you were probably thinking to yourself, really? Unbelievable. And the person out of California says it paints a bleak picture about what's going on with accountability and prosecutors. So we took a quick look at that. And you can go back and look at this stuff. It's pretty interesting reading. You might have said to yourself, 91, that sounds like an awfully high number. I'm a prosecutor. I'm not seeing that kind of activity. Well, they got a couple of interesting cases there. This one was failure to give timely notice of an enhancement. The Graves case we knew about. This one, the Munson case, was called prosecutorial misconduct because on closing argument, the prosecutor called the defendant a molester. Now understand, it was a child molestation case. And the judge declared a mistrial, saying that that was misconduct because you shouldn't have called the defendant a bad name. Thinking, really? That's misconduct? And of course, the Graves case, we knew about the Graves case. So we started looking at it. Here's what we found in short order. Look, this is a real example of what they were doing to us. They went on the internet, they typed in prosecutorial misconduct, and whatever cases they got, they had law students just write them up. All right? That's kind of in a chart. Here's a good one. Taylor versus State. This is a case where on closing argument, the prosecutor explained the punishment charge, said the defendant under this could get this under parole. No objection. He said defendant. He did not say hypothetical defendant, said defendant, but only said it once and was explaining it, no big deal. The Court of Appeals reversed this case, saying that the prosecutor erred in arguing because he said defendant instead of hypothetical defendant. That's one of the 91 cases that is included in a prosecutorial misconduct list. Okay? That's what you're being accused of. Like, really? Well, but here's the funny thing. That was a three-judge panel. Judge Charlie Baird, actually sitting with the visiting judge on that, wrote that opinion. that opinion didn't actually survive. The Court of Criminal Appeals read it and said, no, that's ridiculous. They actually said the prosecutor didn't do anything wrong at all. But the people doing the research for the Innocence Project, they just read Charlie Baird's opinion, and they put that in their report as one of the 91. They never actually shepherdized the dang case and found out that it had been reversed. That kind of stuff happened all the time. So basically, we broke it down. Out of the 91 cases, 10 of them were federal cases. We don't care about that. That makes no difference to the Texas legislatures. We can't teach that. 11, there was no finding of error at all. 59 were minor trial errors. 11 were reversed because of prosecutor misconduct. All right, so we got 11. Let's look at those 11, shall we? But first, before we look at it, what's the definition of prosecutor misconduct? Y'all got one in your brains? Y'all know what it is? Anybody? Yeah. How about that? They wrote a report, by the way. They issued an entire study about prosecutorial misconduct without ever defining what prosecutor misconduct is. How can you write a report about something when you don't define it? And by the way, when they gave their press conference, they said, when we talk about prosecutor misconduct and error, they use the word error all the time when they gave their press conference, but all the reports talk about misconduct. So the bottom line is, we worked on a definition. See what you think of this. You know, the bottom line is we're trying to talk about intentional misconduct. We're talking about when a prosecutor deliberately does something with the intent to jack the case up. That's kind of what we're talking about here. It's maybe not a perfect definition, but this is the definition that we think the public uses. And by the way, when we talk to the media outlets who originally reported on that Innocence Project report, and we started talking to them about this, they got it right away. They felt like maybe they'd been a little misled by the media, by the Innocence Project people trying to jack up their numbers when really it wasn't near as bad as you would think. So, the bottom line is we, oh yeah, and by the way, a little, just so you know, okay, there was 11 cases, arguably you could talk about. During that time period, you all handled over 4,300,000 cases, okay? 28,000 were jury trials, 66,000 were appealed and had post-conviction review. Out of all those opportunities to complain, there were 11 in which there were complaints. I don't know about you, but, you know, I know 11's bad. We can say everyone's bad, but that's not really that bad, I don't think. And here's, by the way, after we looked at 11, 4 of them were mistrials that were granted. So they called that misconduct. But then we were later allowed to retry them. Like the Monster case I told you about, the Court of Criminal Appeals looked at that and said, no, that prosecutor's argument was proper. Go back and retry it. So all those mistrials were actually, we got to go and try them. So there was really no misconduct. One of them was a Batson case. And I don't know about y'all, but, you know, Batson can be a problem, but I don't know that every time a Batson challenge is granted on a prosecutor, that's automatically misconduct. If that were the case, I don't know. So I don't know where to put that case. So the bottom line is we had a few cases left. We're going to take 2 of them out because in both of those cases, they were like 20-year-old cases in which the prosecutor had died, could not defend himself, so the Court of Criminal Appeals said, let's try that case again because nobody knows what happened anymore. So the bottom line is we're left with the same cases we knew about all along. The Cockrell case, that was a case in which Willis, that was a case out of West Texas, an arson case that ended up in actual innocence. Banks was a case out of Beaumont. Banks, by the way, it was a big bad Brady problem. Banks just pled to life in prison in October, so they resolved that thing fairly. Graves, we know about Graves and Masonheimer. Like I say, we teach a bunch about that. Bad case gone wrong out of Abilene where prosecutors had a closed file, and it got to them. So that was a problem. One question, just so you all know, people say, are you accountable? I got to tell you, I think the prosecutors are accountable. And we kind of went through this list, just so you know. State bar discipline. Y'all are subject to the state bar. Criminal prosecution. It can happen, and it has happened on more than one occasion. Removal. There have been prosecutors removed from office, threatened with it. Civil lawsuits. Y'all do get sued. Even if you got, you know, your immunity, you get sued. Courts of inquiry. We're about to have one up in Williamson County. They call them courts of injury, actually, and there's a reason for that. Because nothing will come of the court of inquiry except a lot of injury. In contempt of court, you can be held in contempt. Have any of y'all ever been held in contempt of court? Steve, you have been at least once, I know. Okay. I was ordered to sit in court as a jail punishment once by Judge McSpadden. He was so mad. I had commented on the defendant's failure to testify, and so McSpadden made me sit there for like the whole day as punishment. So it was kind of like contempt. And ballot box. So, I mean, and you know, people lose all the time, and that's a corrective measure for the public. By the way, if you read our report, we listed those things. It's not pleasant to talk about what happens, you know, but the truth is things do happen to prosecutors. We have 334 independently elected district and county attorneys in Texas, over 2,600 assistants. You know, things are going to happen. So we're going to have some people in trouble. We're going to have some people that get prosecuted. We got people that, a lot of people are going to get beat because of problems. And the bottom line is this. It doesn't paint a bleak picture. It paints a group of people who are dedicated, working really hard, doing a good job every day. Yeah, someone's trying to take advantage of some high publicity cases, but the truth of the matter is y'all are doing an excellent job, and we're not getting the credit for it right now. We decided to write the report, and you can go on and see it on our website. We made some key findings. Number one is, and this is important, talking points for y'all. Look, eyewitness identification remains the number one reason these cases got turned around. There are problems with eyewitness identification. We've learned about it. You all are training on it. Police officers are training on it. There's new procedures. I think we're all aware now that we've got to be careful with eyewitness identification. If there's prosecutor misconduct, yeah, most of the time, and there aren't many cases, most of the time it's something to do with Brady. But that being said, the cases that have come up in the past are just that. There are cases that largely have come up from jurisdictions that operated under closed file policies and generally weren't sharing anything with the defense. This is a big issue that we're just learning about now. The legislature is probably going to do something here and require Brady training for police officers, because most of the Brady violations, it turns out, are not prosecutor violations. They are law enforcement violations. They're stuck in the law enforcement file that never got to you, and there have been some big cases that have been turned around because of that. The Williamson County case, the Morton case, will center on whether the very, very powerful and popular sheriff gave this big bad police report to the brand new district attorney, Ken Anderson, or whether Ken ever saw that report. Ken says, I don't remember ever seeing that. I know that I would have turned it over if I'd seen it, but I don't remember ever seeing that report. That's going to be it. Oh, and by the way, the sheriff is dead, so it's going to be a very interesting hearing. We found out, too, that prosecutors are probably human. You know, those articles about cognitive bias, I kind of made fun of it, but we're going to talk more about that in the future, and you're going to hear about it, because people can get tunnel vision. Everybody gets tunnel vision. Everybody gets something called confirmation bias, where you have an idea and you tend to look at facts that confirm that and tend to put aside facts that don't. Particularly dangerous for police officers and prosecutors. Particularly dangerous. And I'll submit to you, in some of these big bad cases, tunnel vision may have something to do with that. We need to learn about that. We need to be aware of that. There's a couple of great national speakers on it. I'm hoping at some point in time we can bring Alastair Burke to you. In the fall, she wants to come. So I'm going to try to get her. Alastair Burke is a law professor in Hofstra, was a former prosecutor in Oregon, and she kind of takes up for prosecutors on the national level. She's also a crime writer, and her father is James Lee Burke, who writes the David Robichaux novels out of Louisiana. She's a really interesting person, but she's a really good speaker, and Mike's heard her. We're going to get her here for you guys to start talking about this whole issue in the fall. State Bar, you can't learn anything from them. And by the way, you guys have immunity. You know, we asked State Bar, how many prosecutors have been grieved upon? Just tell them, we don't want to know names. Just give us. They go, we don't know. How do you not know? Well, we don't know. We don't keep those kind of records. She said, well, then how are we supposed to examine how often prosecutors are punished by the State Bar if you can't even give us the number? So, you know, for all I know, half of you guys that have grievances, nobody's allowed to know about it, you know. We don't know. Professionalism, of course. Historical context, please. This is really important for y'all. Who knows what that is? Corvair, all right. What was the book written about this? Unsafe at Any Speed. That's right. My father was career General Motors. He hates Ralph Nader to this day because Nader wrote a book condemning this car as a tremendously unsafe car. Well, you know, if a Corvair was driving around today and crashed, Would we judge today's auto safety based upon the Corvair? I think not. I don't think we would. But, you know, we're judging today's based upon what happened in trials from 1983. In places where they had closed file policies and paper, there weren't computers, there was nothing. Defense is very different today. We're trying to judge, and we got to remember when we talk to people that they're judging us upon what Charles Sebesta did in the early 80s in Burleson County. And I don't know that it's always a fair comparison. And I got to thinking about that too, because I watched saw this television show about Vietnam, and they had this story about this big battle, and everyone's fighting, and suddenly the American bombers came over and they dropped a 500-pound bomb on a bunch of Americans, and they kept going. It was really bad because they killed a bunch of their own guys, and they had this big fight. I mean, wait a second. They just had a friendly fire incident and killed, and no one's talking like it's a big deal. Well, you know, when you're in the middle of a battle and it's really bad, no one's really talking about friendly fire incidents and the bad things that happen. You're kind of just fighting the war. I don't recall anyone talking about incidents in the 80s when we were prosecuting, when it was really, really bad. No one was really talking about that back then. I'm not saying that it wasn't, that we weren't careful and we tried to do right and we dismissed cases where we thought people were innocent, but we weren't shook like we were now about, we got to be more careful about eyewitnesses and things like that. I think it was a little different world, and I think maybe a little historical perspective is important. So, bottom line is you need your immunity, and that's kind of the line for us. Your association, I know that prosecutors are going to be fighting to make sure that you maintain your immunity. You can't get sued in civil court. That really can't happen, and I know that people are going to be working hard to make sure you maintain your immunity. I don't think that's a remedy that someone's going to aim at you. But we are going to talk about a good definition. We're going to look for resources for Brady to start to bring to you so that you have, from the NAPC, National Association of Prosecutor Coordinators, my group, you're going to get everything we got from the national groups that can help you on this area. We're going to help law enforcement start to talk about training for Brady for police and how that's going to work. Law schools, they don't really teach Brady in any form or fashion. When you get students, you get people come to the DA's office, they probably don't know anything about Brady. All they've learned is about zealously defending their clients. But, they got to kind of learn and figure out what it is to be a prosecutor, which is a lot different. We're going to keep talking about the cognitive bias, and we're going to keep talking to other folks about investing in your professionalism, which means the training and the support that you need. By the way, Brady needs to be taught in a new way, and we're working on it. You've got experienced elected prosecutors, like Mr. Holmes and Mike and people who have to send the message, and I think the message you're getting is a good message. But, you've got newly elected prosecutors, and they found out in Dallas this was exactly the problem they had. During the exoneration problem, they were overwhelmed with crime. Every prosecutor had this many cases. Law enforcement wasn't doing a good job of really investigating those cases. But the prosecutors were so overwhelmed that they took that case, and whatever was inside that file is what they tried. They never had the time to go outside that file and run down leads or check on stuff because they were just too busy. They tried the file in front of them and didn't ask any questions. Sound familiar? Dangerous. That's what happened in Dallas because they were just too busy, and law enforcement wasn't giving them the information they needed. They were trying what was in there. The other problem they had in Dallas was that they were rotating people so quickly through cases that people would get a case where 5 or 6 different prosecutors had the case. And, some of them were chief prosecutors and there were homicide detectives that looked at it and all these other really good prosecutors had it. The grand jury had indicted. Who am I, brand new prosecutor, to doubt that this is a good case because so many other really good prosecutors have already looked at this case and it's still here. It must be a good case. They weren't communicating very well about your responsibilities as a prosecutor, and a number of young prosecutors were taking cases that probably should have been better investigated and handled, and they were trying them because the expectation was they had to try those cases, because after all, lots of other good prosecutors had looked at those cases before them. So there's some real training and messages that need to get sent about how you handle your cases. A lot of that's from mid-level supervisors, the court chiefs, how they handle that. And we're going to be talking about that, especially making sure that the new prosecutors know that it's their case, they understand their duties and responsibilities, and they have the freedom and flexibility to do what they need to do with that case, fully investigate it if they need to, or get their questions answered. what you said, your story about going and talking to Mr. Holmes about that case. Exactly the kind of message that they didn't have in Dallas. In Dallas, frankly, the message was, you know, you're a weenie if you don't try these cases. They counted it. I mean, that was kind of the culture back then. They had a different culture than Harris County did, and I think it kind of bit them in the butt, frankly. Not that they're bad prosecutors, they're trying real hard, but, you know, you weren't taught to, you wouldn't have ever called Mr. Henry Wade and asked him if you could, you know, tell him you had doubts about a case. I don't think that would have happened in Dallas. And it happened in Houston, and that should tell you a lot about the quality of this office. Oh, yeah, one other thing. Non-lawyer staff and investigators. You know, one thing we forget is our investigators and your administrative staff, they know a lot about your cases and your files. And they've got a lot of information. We've launched an effort to start training investigators more and our key personnel on their duties and responsibilities because they're part of the team. You know, they hear stuff, they know things, and you got to know what they know. It's really important. So opening those lines of communication is going to be very important. Is training the answer? Senator Duncan's staffer asked me that, hey, you think training would be good? And I said, yeah, I think we can do a lot with training. I mean, I'm not going to volunteer to punish prosecutors, but I think we can do a lot with training. This is Air France. This is that airplane that about 4 years ago was flying from Brazil to Paris, flight 447, when the engines shut off not the engines, the engines were working fine, but the autopilot shut off at 35,000 feet. And the pilots crashed the airplane into the ocean, inexplicably. They didn't know what to do. It turns out that they weren't trained on what happens when the autopilot shuts off because of icing on the wings at 35,000 feet. The airplane had gotten so complicated. It used to be that pilots flew airplanes with the assistance of computers. Today, the computer flies the airplane with the assistance of the pilot. And the training had not caught up with that. The training didn't manage that. The pilot's last words in the black box were, I can't believe we're crashing this airplane. Because they weren't trained on it. So the public was demanding that there be all sorts of penalties in France, and they were all looking at that. The industry said, wait a second. We can fix this with training. Everyone's trying to do a good job here. We need to look at training. So I think when we talk about crashing airplanes, we talk about convictions that turn out to be bad, I think a lot of times we can train around that. We put out our report. I thought it was pretty well received. You can see it on our internet website, tbca.com. You can look at all the documents. Got a whole bunch. The essential pieces, there's a bunch of press releases and little stuff that you can read. The Innocence Project people were really chapped at us, by the way. They were really upset. They said that, you know, wait a second. They said, well, we're puzzled that the District and County Attorneys Association felt the need to disparage our work, especially given the fact that we took pains to acknowledge the limitations within our research. No, they didn't. They didn't say they were sloppy and terrible. So I thought that was pretty funny. But they did 2 more tour stops after Texas, and in both tour stops, they're now talking about prosecutor error and misconduct. They've inserted the word error everywhere. They've quit talking about prosecutor misconduct. So you learn something. I love this clip. Is the Innocence Project a paper tiger? I think maybe they are. This is a bully. And the little guy's the bully. Oh, we got some sound. Happy endings, you know. I think maybe the Innocence Project, you know, was acting a bit like a bully, and I kind of feel like maybe we slammed them a little bit because they've kind of gone away. We haven't heard much about that. At least if they do come back, at least let's talk about the 6 cases we really care about. Okay? Let's just not make this stuff up as we go, and that's our point. Mr. Morton's response. This is very interesting. By the way, we sent him an advanced copy of our report. Mr. Morton has moved to Longview. He is not in Austin. He is living a quiet life. He has hired a lobbyist to be at the Capitol. That, by the way, is going to be a good thing. He said early on, he goes, look, I'm living in Longview for a reason. He doesn't want to be used by Innocence Project and other people that might want to use him as a front guy for their agendas. He wants his own agenda, and he does have an agenda. He wants to change some things. What he said is, look, and I love this, he applauded the association's report, Michael Morton. He says he liked it. It's a good starting point. He wants some accountability, Shannon Edmonds in my office is our government affairs director. He actually met with Mr. Morton and Thomas Ratliff, his lobbyist for a while, and they talked about stuff, and Mr. Morton's going to be keeping in touch with us. And he said, look, I like prosecutors. Remember, I was in the pen for 25 years with a lot of really bad guys. I know that you guys need to do a good job. You just need to not put me in there. Which is, kind of a reasonable request, actually, So he really, he's a pretty good guy. And he said, I want to make sure the State Bar can do it if a prosecutor's really gone bad. I want to make sure there's some reasonable things, but I don't want to make it hard for everybody else. He goes, I want to make some changes in discovery to make sure that kind of discovery stuff doesn't happen again. So I don't know. So far, that sounds pretty reasonable to me. By the way, Mr. Morton will probably be a keynote speaker at our annual conference next year. We wanted to invite him, actually, to talk to us. We can't do it until this deal is done, this court inquiry is done. But I think there's a time and a place for him to come and talk to y'all. So he'll probably be there. What can you do? You got to talk to animal clubs and people, when you start talking about prosecutor misconduct. I know everyone's busy, but if you hear things about that, you can do that. Here's the problem. This is the problem I get all the time. What about Charles Sylvester? What about Napalm Charlie? Even if one bad prosecutor is too much and we need to punish that guy. I don't know. I'm afraid I got nothing there. Maybe you guys got something that works. But Charles Sylvester is a hard-headed guy. There's a reason his name was Napalm Charlie. I think he had tunnel vision really bad. Charles thought Anthony Graves did. Charles, you can go on the web. He still does. And he spits bullet about what Kelly Siegler says about him. He says, now that guy's good for it, and I still believe he did it, and I'll go to my grave thinking he did it. Charles had if nothing else, a big bad case of tunnel vision. I don't know what you do about a guy like that. The State Bar took a shot at him and missed because statute of limitations is run. Do you exchange statute of limitations for bar grievances? I don't know. Something is going to happen, though, because unfortunately, as good as we all can do, someone's still going to say, but what are you going to do about Charles Sylvester? And right now, I got to tell you, I don't have an easy answer for that. I really don't.
Well, Ron?
Yeah.
What are some of the plans that the legislature do about that? Any bills yet?
Yes. The first bill I found to do something about that was filed by Harold Dutton in Houston. His bill, official oppression, in theory, already applies to Brady violations. Think about it. You could today be prosecuted if you knowingly deny someone's right, that is the right to, constitutional right to get exculpatory evidence on the Supreme Court. If you deny a person that right intentionally or knowingly, that's a Class A misdemeanor, right? I don't know that anyone's ever been prosecuted for it, but in theory, you could be prosecuted already for official oppression. Mr. Dutton's bill, number 1, makes that a third-degree felony if it's a Brady violation. And number 2, removes any statute of limitations. So there's no statute of limitations for a Brady violation ever under that bill. So, how do you feel, Mike, now? What? It's the same as murder. Yeah, a Brady violation would be on par with murder when it comes to a statute of limitation. There's more than one prosecutor who has a problem with that for a lot of different reasons. I don't know if that bill is going to go anywhere. It'll get a hearing, probably. But I don't know that it makes it. But that's the kind of thing we're going to talk about. I was in Senator Whitmire's office just to say hello a couple weeks ago, and he yelled at me for half an hour about John Bradley. Yeah, what are you going to do about Bradley? Bradley didn't do anything illegal or unethical, and I'm still getting yelled at about Bradley. I'm sorry the guy's kind of a butthead, but, he didn't do anything illegal. He's a friend of mine, I can say that. All right, now, let's go back to my original analogy, because I really want to wrap this up and bring it around, because I really do think that it shows the difference between what we do every day as a prosecutor and what everybody else does and what everybody else thinks. And that's kind of what makes you all so special. Prosecutor exceptionalism really does mean something to me. And it is different. And it takes education, because a lot of people just think you're a lawyer out there trying to win cases. They really don't understand. And largely because they've been taught that if you can get away with it, you're supposed to. That's kind of our culture. If you can get away with it, you're supposed to. And that's kind of what everybody thinks everybody else does. And that's the problem you face as a prosecutor, because you know that's not it. Y'all know who that guy is? You probably wouldn't. He's Lance Armstrong's lawyer. Isn't he a great guy? He's the guy who works in a law firm whose job it is to sue people who tell the truth and beat them into submission. And by the way, he's done it in a bunch of different cases. I just wanted to look and find out who this guy was, who was basically Lance Armstrong's attack dog in all these attacks on people who turns out were telling the truth. So that guy has a great job, huh? Yeah, do you really want to be that guy? I don't know. Y'all know who this guy is? What's his name? Yeah, most of y'all don't know, do you? There's a reason you don't know him. Do you know he is America's first and only all-around men's gold medal winner in gymnastics? My God, I mean, it's huge. America's never won that. We've never won the gold, but you don't know it, do you? Why not? Well, you know, that picture was taken when it was in Athens in like 1994, I guess. He was 12th in the all-around going into this deal. He had fallen butt first onto the scoring table in the earlier round. I mean, it was really a disaster. But out of nowhere, he does these amazing routines. He's just really great. And so it's by a razor-thin margin. They score this deal up, and there's other Korean guys doing really good. These two Korean guys finish right there, and they get him up in the stand, and just as they're giving him the medal, somebody goes, well, wait a second, there's been a scoring mistake. You actually didn't win by 12/100ths. You actually came in second, and that tall Korean fella on the left, he actually won. They did a misscoring. He should have gotten the gold. So, now what do we do? So the International Gymnastics Group came to him and said, look, Mr. Ham, we got a problem here. You didn't win the gold. Really, this guy won the gold. We would think it would really be a cool thing. It would really honor sports and the profession if you would switch. What did Paul Ham say? No, I'm good. I'm keeping the gold. So he said, no. He said, no, I'm not. I got the gold. It's around my neck. I ain't giving it up. And maybe that's why you never heard about him. Wheaties said, Wheaties had a chance. I mean, this guy was the first ever male to win this deal from the United States. That's huge. He didn't get the Wheaties box. Some other guy in track and field who won one thing got the Wheaties box. He didn't get Wheaties. He got nothing for that. What if he had done something different? What if he'd gone against the grain of what we've been taught in sports about win, win, win at all costs? What if he said, I'll take the silver? That would be a legend. The guy would be a god of sports with that silver medal. But he didn't do it. He didn't do it. He didn't take that chance. But I think you can teach it. I really do. Anyone know who this guy is? Bobby Jones. Golf is different than every other sport. I've been putting up all these things about sports that teaches us bad lessons. Bobby Jones was a legend of the game in the 20s. And he was the first person who called penalties on himself when he made mistakes. Twice in two major tournaments, he called penalties on himself and didn't win the tournament. And when asked about it, he said, there's only one way to play this game. Only one way. And that's kind of followed down. This is Laura Inglis. She is the Oregon State champion. Well, she almost was the state champion 4 times. Last time she lost it, though, because she made a scoring mistake, and she self-reported it. This is a fellow who plays in a league out in the East Coast, and he was winning the championship, except that he played with the wrong ball the whole time. It was like the Titleist. It was the wrong version of the Titleist. He found out about it, reported it, and didn't do it. The point is, look, Bobby Jones taught that from a long time ago. He started that tradition in golf, that we play the game the right way. And I believe that you can really teach that. I believe we can teach that, and we can continue to spread that in our profession. Even if everyone else doesn't understand it because they're following the other sports traditions of get away with it if you can, We don't. I believe in this. I really believe that in Harris County, I learned from Mike, who was one of my chiefs, and other people, that we follow the Billy Jack style of prosecution. I don't know if y'all know this movie, but Billy Jack was a fellow who, and I believe what you do is you tell the defense, here's everything I got, here's what I'm going to do to you. Here is what I'm going to do. Stop me if you can, which I believe is the Billy Jack style of prosecution. That's our obligation, and I think that you can teach this.
Know something? There's not a damn thing you're going to be able to do about it.
See, I think that's perfect, right? I mean, that's exactly right. That is our style. You want to see the end, don't you? That's kind of satisfying. Look, but that should be our style of prosecution. We should be telling people, and I think that's the culture in this office is, we're going to tell you what we got. Here's what we got. Here's what I'm going to do. If you can stop me, be my guest. That's the culture that I think has been trained in this office and continues to be. And it came from this guy, and you heard him earlier today, and I think it'll be carried on. Pedro Oregon, where we leave off. All right, he was dead on the floor with 12 bullets in his back. Officers were all in the grand jury. The Hispanic community was like, okay, something big better happen here. We better see this deal. We better see some justice here. So they go into the grand jury and they come out with an indictment. Well, one indictment, as I recall, Ed, was one of the officers got indicted for criminal trespass, I believe. Class A or B? Class A. See, there you go. No build on all the murder cases. I mean, wow. You could see the city. You could see Houston going up in flames over this one, right? So they call Mr. Holmes. They want to have his comment on this. You know, what's the district attorney say about this deal that can calm the public and make sure the city doesn't burn that night? What is he going to say? You gotta be kidding me. He said that? Really? You can even listen to him say, oh, it's okay to kill him dead, it's okay to kill him dead, dead. Well, what the heck? Who would say that, you know, to a mob of people? A guy got shot in the back 12 times by cops who shouldn't have ever been there. Why did they know Bill? Easy question, right? It was, you couldn't try it for murder. It was a self-defense deal. The officer had heard a shot, right? Well, the shot was fired by the other officer. The second officer in line, when the first officer said gun, shoots the first officer in the back with his gun. So the shot that was fired came from the officers, but all the officers thought they were being fired on, and of course, if they're being fired on, they get self-defense. Really bad circumstance, but the truth of the matter is, we weren't convicting anyone for murder in that case. And Mr. Holmes is exactly legally right. But wow, how is it that you can get away with saying something like that? I'm going to tell you all right now, if you're a younger prosecutor, don't try that. But look, Holmes could do it. And he could do it because he was unfailingly honest. Yeah, he was gruff. He never talked to national media, but he was honest with the public. He knew his business. He had that reputation for being fair to everybody. And I think what happened after he said that was the public kind of went, well, yeah, I guess you're right, Mr. Holmes. You know, and that was kind of the end of it. And he could get away with that because of his reputation. And I encourage you to think about that as you grow in your careers as to what kind of reputation you want to have, because I think the leadership from this office, as long as I've been here and seen it, has been in that direction. To be able to end your career and have that kind of credibility that in a clutch, you could say something like that and the public trusts you is important. Well, heck, you know, one time he ran for district attorney, I forget which one of his many times, this was the endorsement in the Chronicle. That's what they just put a picture of a handlebar mustache. And everybody knew who it was. They knew who to vote for, you know. All right. This is my guy. This is Alvin Richard. Now, I convicted Alvin Richard in the late 80s of sexual assault. It was an easy case because Alvin Richard had a whole bunch of priors, not really violent priors, but a bunch of drug stuff and all that. So the girl had been kidnapped, dragged into a bad drug house, brutal rape. So it was an easy case. He couldn't take the stand. She saw this guy, she saw Alvin on the street corner 8 months later and said, there's the guy who raped me. And the officers arrest him. I get a report from the lab that says that Alvin Richard is a non-secretor, and the person who raped her was a non-secretor, and the 1 in 5 chance that a male is a non-secretor. So I had her eyewitness, and I had 1 in 5 chance. What does that add up to? That adds up to life in prison, doesn't it? And it sure did. Only the lab test was completely jacked up. And Baldwin, I know you've worked on that case for a while, but I got a call about 4 years ago saying, hey, we're letting this guy out because the lab test that you thought was a good lab test, it weren't right. So he's out now. The good news about this deal, I mean, and let me tell you, some of y'all have had that, and you may have it in your career. It's not fun. It feels really bad. But, he didn't hold it against me. I'll say that. First of all, he said that, maybe it saved my life because I was such a bad druggie. If I hadn't gone to prison, I would have died on the streets. I'm going, okay, that's something. But, but here's the deal. If my nickname had been Napalm Charlie, all right? If my nickname had been like Killer Keppel or something really bad, I don't know how that would have been treated. The media called when they found out that I was the director of the DA's Association and one of my guys was being released for a wrongful conviction. They sniffed around that and they called around and were asking about that deal. They never wrote a story about it. They never said Keppel has a guy that has been released who was wrongfully convicted. I'm not saying that, that maybe it was just boring, but what I'm thinking to myself is I didn't have a reputation for being a Napalm Charlie. When Napalm Charlie got in trouble, there wasn't anyone that was going to be a friend of his. When people said, man, there's a Brady violation, everybody said, well, we always kind of thought that about that guy. His reputation kind of preceded him. When it came time for him to have friends, he didn't have any. He didn't have them. John Bradley is a good friend of mine. But John's a hard guy to work with sometimes. John was out there. John went 100 miles an hour. When it came time for friends, he didn't do anything wrong. Man, people chewed him up because he had been so hard charging. Because they had closed file policies, because they've really, really been hard on people. So what I'm trying to say is that I think if you try your case in the mold of John Holmes, if you try your case and you handle your cases in that open, honest, and straightforward fashion, that you can have that kind of reputation, that if you need to say what John Holmes said to the public, you can say it, and they'll trust you and believe it. And I think everyone here is well on the path to doing that. That's the mold, I think, of Texas prosecution. I'm proud that it's the way this office has gone. We're going to have bumps in the road. We're going to have these arguments about Brady. We're going to have to look at it. But I'm confident with the way y'all are doing your work that y'all are going to still be this person. You are going to continue to be Mr. District Attorney. You're going to continue to be, a superhero to the public. Because, superheroes, all they do is take whatever gifts they got and use it for the public good. That's all you're doing. You are all superheroes, and I'm proud that I can continue to serve you, and I'm looking forward to doing it for the next few years. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Okay, just make sure you fill out the evaluation. You get the class on not on Tuesday, but Thursdays, 2 to 4.